Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome to Navigating Through the Holidays. It is being brought to you by Tajdīd-ul-Iman and Becoming Muslim Calgary. We are formerly New Muslim Circle of Calgary. And we are being hosted today by Imam Iqbal and the Islamic Association of Northwest Calgary. So we are grateful for the space and grateful for the collaboration with them. My name is Jennifer Taylor. I am part of the Tajdīd-ul-Iman and Becoming Muslim Calgary board, and I will be your moderator for the evening. I'm being told to smile. I'm a native Calgarian. I was born and raised in Calgary, and I converted to Islam during Ramadan in 2011, and that was an experience. So it's been 12 years now, and alhamdulillah, it's been a joy in my life. I'd like to introduce my other panel members here. We have Imam Iqbal. Most of you know him. He's as the Imam of the Northwest Islamic Center. He's also the chaplain of the University of Calgary and SAIT. He's also a born and raised Calgarian. And he has a degree in Sharia from South Africa, and he's also been an Imam with the MCC for 6 years as well. So welcome and thank you for hosting us. And to his left is Brother Chris Venus, who is the president of our Tajdīd-ul-Iman and Becoming Muslim Calgary. And Chris is also a born and raised Calgarian, so very rare to have all three of us in that position. Chris is a graduate of U of C and SAIT in radio broadcasting. He converted to Islam 14 years ago. And as I said, he's the president of our group. So welcome to both Imam Iqbal and to Brother Chris.
Thank you.
And we are going to now give you a little brief description of what tonight is going to encompass, and then we will have Imam Iqbal do an opening prayer for us. So tonight we're going to cover both the Islamic perspective, how Muslims should deal with non-Islamic religious and secular holidays, and real-world situations for new Muslims and newly practicing Muslims who face who are dealing with non-Muslim or non-practicing Muslim families, friends, or co-workers. To just give you a little bit more of a background of Tajdīd-ul-Iman and Becoming Muslim, we are open to Muslims who newly embrace Islam. We are also open to born Muslims who are re-embracing their faith, who maybe weren't practicing or stopped practicing and have decided to come back to Islam. And so we're open and welcome to all groups, and we're of course also open and welcome to anybody who is exploring Islam and has not yet embraced Islam. I will now turn it over to Imam Iqbal for the opening prayer.
Actually, before I start, since Umar is here, he's one of our teachers here in the Musalla. So I'd like to hear his recitation as well. So I'll actually hand it over to him, inshallah, to take my place for the opening prayer, again, if that's okay with you guys.
Perfectly fine.
Quran. Just Quran. Yeah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت إنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Just go to the camera and record it locally.
Jazakallah, brother. I'm now going to turn it over to Chris. As most people know, Calgary is situated on native lands, and so we're going to turn it over to Brother Chris to do an acknowledgement of the indigenous territory lands.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So, as Muslims, we're holders of treaties, right? It's in the seerah, that's in the history of our people. So, us as Canadians or residents of Canada, we are also on land that is, original to Awal al-Watan, so people of the First Nations, right? So, I'm just going to do a brief land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Ilaari Nakoda Nations, and the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation within District 6, and all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. And I just want to add, this is a beautiful homecoming event for me. As Sister Jennifer mentioned, I've been a Muslim for almost 15 years now. And a lot of my knowledge that was built in this masala. I had come here many, many weekends for what was called Ilm Intensive, and it was held by Imam Fayaz and some of his counterparts that had went to the same Darul Ulam as him. So I just want to say Jazakallah khair, because all the predecessors of this masala have a hand in the knowledge of many people, and I am one of them. And I'm blessed that my heart has stayed steadfast on Islam for all these years, that I've been able to maintain a family, and that a lot of that is due in part parcel because of being in this space. And so I just wanted to share that with the group here.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. So officially welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to now ask a couple of questions of Imam Iqbal, and then we're going to do some discussion questions that will be between the Islamic perspective from the Imam, and then real world examples that converts and new Muslim or born Muslims that are re-embracing their faith face, both with their families and friends and co-workers. So I'm going to start by asking Imam Iqbal if you could please tell us what Salat al-Rahim means in English and what it directs Muslims to do.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. This is an excellent question. Silatul Rahim means to maintain family ties. And Rahim comes from the same root word as the word Rahmah, which is mercy. And it refers to the womb in a certain sense as well. So it's an important aspect and element of Islam which is extremely critical. And to show how important this is, there's actually one hadith for a lot of people that find difficulty in maintaining family ties, and it's not something exclusive to even any particular religion. It could be Muslim or non-Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ actually mentions in one hadith, he says, لا يدخل الجنة قاطع, that a person that cuts family ties will not enter Jannah, will not enter paradise. And this goes to show the severity of doing this, because Islam came to build bonds, it did not come to break and destroy bonds. Even in the context of a person embracing Islam and their parents not doing so, or vice versa. Even in this context, there's still some application to this important context. And just to give some understanding of this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentions, that لا يدخل الجنة قاطع, there are basically two understandings of it. One of them is that if a person rejects any fundamental element of the religion of Islam, which is known by Muslim and non-Muslim, it's a fundamental pillar of the faith, then this will actually excommunicate them from even being a Muslim, although they even subscribe to doing so. So if you have, for example, a Muslim and he says, I don't believe in maintaining family ties, then he's negated this fundamental aspect of the religion, and although maybe he might identify as a Muslim, but from a technical standpoint, he would not be a Muslim. And this goes to show the importance of that. And the other understanding of this hadith, that a person that cuts family ties will not enter Jannah, is that we believe as Muslims, there could be sinful Muslims. There are those Muslims that are righteous and they would make their way into Jannah or paradise directly. There would be others from among them that have some sins, and those sins would have to be absolved and they would have to go to Jahannam, the hellfire, for a short while, perhaps a longer period of time. There's a story of the last person to exit the hellfire. It's an interesting one as well. But this goes to show the fact that some Muslims would have to enter the hellfire. And the point being here is that if a Muslim cuts family ties, he will never be allowed direct entry into Jannah. That's the other interpretation of this. So to maintain family ties is critical and key, and a fundamental of the religion of Islam. So hopefully that covers some elements of the question.
Jazakallah khair, and that's very important for Muslims who are re-engaging with their faith as well as converts who are entering the fold of Islam, because oftentimes we find ourselves struggling with our families who don't understand about what Islam is about. They just see what they see on the news, and they don't understand why we would want to be a part of a religion that they feel is of course we all hear it's the terrorist religion, or for women it's typically, that it dominates women or suppresses them. And so it's important for us to maintain those ties, not only for our own faith, but also to help and educate our family members who are struggling to understand why we became Muslim. So thank you very much for explaining that, and letting us know how important it is within our faith. Next, I'd like you to talk briefly about Surah Al-Kafirun, and within the context of today's topic of navigating through the holidays.
Yeah, it's a really important surah. It was one of the earlier chapters revealed, and the backstory of it was that the mushrikeen, or the disbelievers at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, wanted the Prophet to essentially give up the religion and stop propagating it initially. And then later on they came to a sort of compromise wherein they said that if you worship our God for a day, then we'll worship your God for a day, or for a year, whatever it might be, whatever time frame they decided upon. This was kind of their compromise that they tried to make with the Prophet ﷺ. And this surah was essentially revealed for this purpose, that say to the disbelievers that I do not worship what you worship, nor do you worship what I worship. You have your religion and we have ours. So this makes a clear distinction. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that inna dina inda Allah al-Islam, that the religion in accordance with God, in accordance with Allah, is Islam. And these days people try to blend religions and say that it all have this idea of perennialism, that religions are sort of all stemming from the same point. But at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves a question, that either after death there will be something or there will not be something. Either it's going to be resurrection or it's going to be reincarnation. One of them has to be true. They cannot all simultaneously be true. So the point being here is that Islam makes it very evidently clear, these specific lines that are drawn. But I think what's really important here as well is that even though these lines are drawn in this specific way, there are many traditions which tell us the fact that even though all of these lines are established in this particular way, it's not as though relationships cannot still be maintained with people of other faiths, especially when a person converts. And for this, we can mention a number of stories from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. One of them, which is quite interesting, is that when Asma bint Abi Bakr, who was the daughter of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, the best friend of the Prophet ﷺ, the most righteous Muslim after the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam, after all of the prophets, it's mentioned that his daughter Asma, when she went back to Mecca, later on in the latter portion of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, then her mother presented her with a gift. And because she embraced Islam, then she refused this gift because she thought, my mother's a mushrika. She's an idolater. She does not believe in our faith, so therefore I'm not going to accept this gift from you. And when this happened, there were certain verses of the Quran revealed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah or God does not prevent you from being kind and just to those that don't do one of two things. They don't fight you on account of your religion, nor do they drive you out of your homes, as we see unfortunately happening with our brothers and sisters in Gaza. When it comes to that context, then Allah says that is a type of relationship we cannot have, even if that is your blood relative. However, in other contexts, Allah is telling us that Allah does not prevent you from being kind and just and courteous in those particular contexts and situations. Another story which is interesting in this particular area as well is the fact that there was one companion, his name was Al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad. And actually, it's mentioned that after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, there were a number of companions that were just sitting on the side somewhere, and they saw one of the companions who saw the Prophet ﷺ pass by. So these people, actually the ones that were sitting, one of them was Al-Miqdad, but the others who were with them were actually from those that did not directly see the Prophet. They were from At-Tabi'een, the generation which followed. And they commented by saying that how blessed are these eyes of this person who passed by. He was able to see the Prophet ﷺ in all of these events that we hear about. They actually saw them and witnessed them. And we wish that we would be able to do the exact same thing. And Al-Miqdad, he responded in an angry way. And the people, they commented that we would expect you to be happy, because who would not want to see the Prophet ﷺ and live in that era? And he comments by saying that you don't know how difficult it was in that time. And one of the points that he mentions at the end of this is that when Islam came, some fathers would embrace Islam and the children would not. Some mothers would and the daughters would not. Some children would and the parents would not. And this becomes a challenge for them, that how am I going to navigate like this? So always remind yourself, especially as a new Muslim, because Al-Miqdad, he mentions to a born Muslim, like those that followed the era of the Prophet, he said, Islam has been presented to you on a silver platter. That all you have to do is accept and affirm that what the Prophet ﷺ came with. But a person who's a new Muslim is actually closer to the Sahaba. That they were like that first generation that had to contend with all of these issues with those that, especially in their family, which could be a real test. That imagine you're thinking to yourself, as is mentioned at the end of the hadith, that you would want your children and your parents to be the coolness of your eyes. You would want them to be the coolness of your eyes. But how could they be the coolness of your eyes if you're thinking to yourself, they're not going to enter Jannah? That's a type of pain that you're going to experience. That sometimes some people would leave the faith because of this soul issue. So that's another story which we can mention in this particular context. And again, there are others as well. And again, just to show the fact that when a person embraces Islam, it's not a matter of just simply cutting things off. I don't know if maybe we're going to go to the next question and we can cover this point later on. Again,
I can jump in on that actually.
Sure,
Give
sure.
some real world.
Yeah, this kind of ties into the first question that we were going to ask about recommendations for new Muslims and newly practicing Muslims. What they do, around the holidays, whether it be Christmas, Easter, the Muslim holidays of Eid, those types of things. Like if your families are not practicing or your families are not Muslim, what kind of recommendations or suggestions would you have towards new Muslims or newly practicing Muslims when it comes to these holidays?
so I'll let Chris jump in on this, and then I can take over from there.
So I'm sharing lived experience. One fundamental thing is that we have to understand that, especially for a new Muslim, Islam has to be treated with a sense of gradualism, okay? And having an all or nothing approach is a surefire way to actually lose your steadiness with it, your steadfastness. Because if you go from 0 to 60, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle, okay? Because you might find yourself insulting your family in a way that's not in a good situation. So it takes some navigating, it takes some diplomacy. Now, on the Salatul Rahim thing, that is very important. But also as a mental health thing, if you truly have like a narcissistic parent, that is abusive, you also have to equally manage that for your benefit to keep yourself out of harm's way. Or a narcissistic non-Muslim, who might be mistreating you, right? So you have to do your best to be gentle and lovely with them, but if they are ultimately gonna harm you, and I mean it has to be like a high degree of harm, would you agree?
Yeah.
Because we can't play with the idea that, oh yeah, that's just dad, that's just mom. But if dad, likes to have a Mickey of scotch at Christmas time and he gets a little boisterous, that's probably not a good time to be talking about that kind of stuff, or pushing it. One fun example, I say fun in terms of trying to give levity to it. My stepmother, I love her, she's a very lovely woman. I made the customary call during the holidays, or they called me. She said Merry Christmas to me. And I did the whole thing of, and to you, right? Which is actually like a tried and tested way to politely respond without actually having to acknowledge, have a Merry Christmas, right? But she caught that, and she gave me the gears about it. So just know that people are going to catch these kinds of things. It's going to be annoying. They're not going to know or maybe be as understanding. But don't let that, reduce your determination. You'll get through these kinds of things. But I guess in terms of the greetings, are there any kind of alternative greetings that, that can help us dance around the whole idea of, trying to sound like a Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol character, and still be just with our family?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. To answer this, just to again show the fact that there are still certain things that a person could do in certain contexts. We know, for example, that a person, you can't make dua for a non-Muslim that passed away. Right? This is a restriction. Even the Prophet ﷺ wanted to make dua for his uncle who raised him for 40 years, Abu Talib, and he was not able to do so. However, having said this, just to show that there is some allowance for this, when the Prophet ﷺ, in the incident of Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, when he was going on this expedition between Mecca and Medina, he stopped by a place called Al-Abwa, and in that location was where his mother passed away. So when he got to that place, he started to cry. And the people around him also started to cry. Then he asked Allah that, I want to make dua for her. And Allah refused.
Sorry.
No problem, that's fine. So Allah refused that and did not give permission to the Prophet ﷺ for doing so. And then the Prophet ﷺ, after this, he asked that, can I visit her grave? And the Prophet ﷺ was given the response by his creator that yes, you can. So this goes to show that there are certain things you can do. When it comes to the actual greetings, which are of a religious nature especially, then there's a strict restriction on that. But here we see, when the Prophet ﷺ asked, can I still visit her grave? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, yes, you can. So the point being here, there are certain things when it, for example, if you're going for the purpose of Silatul Rahim, and that's your intention behind it, then that's allowable in a certain sense. If you make something generic, like Happy Holidays, this is significantly better than saying Merry Christmas, because that would entail some sort of at least tacit approval of Christmas, which again we cannot do as Muslims, given the history of what it means and what it entails for your creed of Islam. So I think these are a few points that are important.
What about season's greetings? Is that a little?
That I think is a little bit. Because this could also be the season of Christmas, right? So that.
That's great. I
yeah.
like this. This is great.
Yeah. So I think that one you're playing a little bit closer to things which are a little bit more dubious. I would say. I think sticking to Happy Holidays would be better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you do have to kind of have some principles, and the principles are as follows. Allah mentions in the Quran, in the story of Luqman alayhi salam, and I don't know if he's a prophet necessarily, but there's some discussion on that. Nonetheless, he's having a discussion with his son. And one of the things is that in this story or passage, Luqman al-Hakim, he is basically telling his son that be good to your parents, but if they command you or tell you to worship other than Allah, then you're not allowed to do this, but still live with them in the best way that you can. And there's a principle in Islam which states that لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق, that there's no obedience to the creation in the disobedience of the Creator. There's no obedience to the creation, and the creation could be any entity, whether it's your parents, whether it's other ideologies or anything like that, in the disobedience of the Creator. So this principled stance you do need to take. And that can sometimes be tough for a lot of people. And like Chris mentioned, sometimes you're going to have a lot of backlash for this. But that's a principled stance that you do need to make. And then again, try your best to...
And in place of that backlash, we're here for you. Right? You get, a lousy response and you need people to hang with. We'll try to do something. Let's go out. Let's go for coffee. Go for a walk, And replace it with something good so that you can have, companionship when maybe you could be kind of turfed to the side if you're all of a sudden, being treated that way from family. That's in the most extreme sense. Because there are some people, too, they can't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
What about that? What do we do? That's putting you on the spot.
Right. So could you explain that a bit more clear?
So for instance, somebody embraces Islam, but they can't say a peep.
Right. Got it.
To anybody about it because they're in. I mean, I've heard this is again third-hand knowledge, conveyed by Imam Sahib Webb, where he dealt with a woman who he gave a great response, but I won't say the response, but. The woman was unfortunately a member of a cult, but she embraced Islam and she couldn't leave the cult yet. Maybe not as an extreme situation, but I know there's a couple of people in this city that can't say a thing.
Yeah.
Were there any Sahaba that had to do
Yeah, there were. Yeah, so there are a number of Sahaba that took it, that became Muslim secretly. And again, with teenagers that I've personally dealt with as well, that they can't pray or even be seen praying, or if their parents catch them with this, there are going to be severe repercussions and things like that. And in this context, there are a number of things that one could do. Al-Abbas being one example, that he secretly embraced Islam, and then he helped the Muslims at Uhud, and later on he publicly declared this. So there are examples from the Sahaba that secretly embraced the faith. And in those contexts, Allah knows what's in your heart. Even when it comes to certain types of prayer, as we know, the prayer is incumbent upon us at specified times. And there are certain conditions to it, like standing up. But in certain cases, you could do it sitting down. You could even do it with your finger, just in those extreme situations of fear, so that again you're being secretive in this until you find yourself in a situation like, for example, a teenage kid that can move out at a later point, and then his parents no longer have jurisdiction over him in that particular way. So these things are things that a person could do, and at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's in your heart, right? So even in the cases where you're under torture, let's say you're being tortured, and you're forced to denounce Islam, even if you were to do so, although there were some companions that refused even in this context, and they showed their level of faith, but if you were to do so in this context, this would not be sinful in the least. So that's, I think, one thing. Just to add on to one thing that you said, just to keep things a little bit light, you mentioned the idea of being gradual with your faith. And for example, alcohol was not prohibited immediately, but there were a number of stages in which this took. And even when it comes to hijab, like sometimes this could be another issue as well. Does anyone know when hijab was legislated in Islam? It seems like the main pillar, especially for the sisters, is like one of the major symbols, and it is a major symbol. It's from the sha'air of Islam, one of the symbols of Islam. But just to show the level of gradual faith building in the issue of hijab. Does anyone have an idea of when hijab was legislated? So we know the prophetic message was how long? It was 23 years. So it was 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina. So in this time frame of 23 years, when was hijab legislated? The answer is in the year 18. So there were 18 years of faith building, and then only then it was actually legislated as an obligation for the Muslim sisters. So again, this is a level of making things gradual. And the light point that I wanted to mention is that there was one brother who embraced Islam. And subhanAllah, a little bit after that, he actually passed away as well. This was when I was in the Southwest Masjid as an imam there. And he embraced Islam, and a short while later, he was wearing the Muslim head covering, and he was walking his dog. And one of the people in the masjid took a picture of him. And he came to me and he's like, this guy was walking, and again, there's some discussion as to the fiqh of dogs. I'm not going to discuss this here right now. But the point being is that it was like this person, he's wearing this on his head, and he has the garb of a Muslim, and he's walking his dog. We need to tell him to get rid of his dog. And I'm like, okay, look, this guy might have had this dog for 12 years, 15 years, and he probably loves this dog, maybe. And now you're putting him in a conflict of interest. It's like, okay, now you're making me choose between my dog and Islam. So this can, again, the idea is making things gradual. Again, the issue here is not on the issue of dogs. It's another fiqhi discussion. There's other things in this context, even in terms of keeping one. There's some allowances with certain conditions and the like. But just again to put the perspective of sometimes even Muslims, they would see a person who's a convert or a revert rather, and then they would put these severe restrictions or say that you need to come for all of the daily prayers at the masjid, and you better be up for Fajr tomorrow, or your Islam is now invalidated because you missed a prayer deliberately. Again, take things gradually, and Islam has always been like that right from the beginning.
Exactly what I heard, bringing that up. I'm actually one of those Muslims who, when I converted, had a dog.
There we go.
It was 5 years before he passed, and I didn't have him, and I struggled with that, because of the whole thing about angels don't come into the house where there are dogs. But I had him for 11 years before I converted. So, when you're a single person, they are like your child, and how do you deal with that? Also, to go back to, dealing with your non-Muslim or non-practicing Muslim families, or even your friends and co-workers that may not know that you've embraced Islam, in the season that we're coming into, where we have Christmas parties going on, whether they're within your family, at work, with your friends, co-workers, that type of thing. We have talked a little bit about how to kind of get around with, the exposing yourself to people who don't know that you've embraced Islam. But what if you're in a setting where whether it be a family gathering or co-workers, that type of thing, where there is food that is haram, alcohol being served, and people are starting to notice that you're not partaking of either. What would you suggest, both of you, I'll put this question to both of you, what would you suggest that newly practicing Muslims or new Muslims to Islam, how they handle those situations, particularly if they have a fear of being exposed, of having converted to Islam because they know that there is going to be harshness within their family.
I have a quick thing to mention. There's a new phenomenon, and we can thank Gen Z and potentially Gen Alpha. Alcohol consumption is decreasing in this generation.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So there's less youngsters actually taking up drinking. So therefore, it's actually kind of taboo. Oh, what? You drink? Yuck. Like there's that kind of attitude now. So may Allah increase that attitude.
Yeah, so I think a point here to understand, there's a number of angles to it. Like if you were forced to, then from the mercy of Islam is that Allah will not take you to task for a situation in which you were forced to do anything. So for example, even the Uyghur Muslims in China at a certain point in Ramadan, because of the fact that they wanted to destroy their religion, they were forcing them to eat pork and forcing them to eat in the month of Ramadan. So under threat of force, if this is ever the case, then in this context, from the extreme angle, from talking about obviously, if this were to happen, this would be something else in Canada. I don't think anybody would ever get to that level, but just as a point of example, that if you were ever forced to, then you have the absolute, even if you did eat it, you would never be sinful in this context at all. So that needs to be said from one perspective. The other thing is, again, like Chris mentioned, there are things that you can say. Sometimes as a Muslim man, even in certain contexts, if a sister, or let's say she's a non-Muslim, reaches out her hand, sometimes Muslims would say directly that as a Muslim, I'd love, I have all the respect for you, but I can't shake your hand, right? They might say this. Others might make an excuse. They might say, I'm sick. So even from the Muslim perspective, living in Canada, navigating these challenges and sometimes making excuses does happen even to Muslims. So from this angle, you're not alone. So in this particular context, so that's one thing that we can do. And again, it just depends on the level of acceptance that you have at that stage with your family, into how much you can and are willing to engage in those specific things, especially if people start to see this. So hopefully that will provide some explanations. If there's any further questions or specifics or specific, I don't know how to see this word, specifics, let's go with that. To this, let me know. Maybe you can clarify again if there's any specific situations or scenarios.
We'll get into a couple more scenarios, but Chris, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
I've personally dealt with, visiting my brother, and mom, around the holidays. And I'm thankful that I have a family they know what's up. So we don't necessarily, and one other thing is I don't, ever since we started, like my wife and I, we used to go and for the intention of Salatul Rahim on Christmas Day. We used to go during Christmas Day. And up until a couple of years ago, we actually had the hard conversation with my brother and my mom and said, Mom, Howie, we're going to now limit it to maybe visiting you after Christmas Day, okay? And the reason is I've got 2 daughters, and I don't want their hearts falling in love with the Christmas tree and the gift giving. And we've been able to modify it wonderfully, because in December, it's report card time. So therefore, the gift giving is based off of report card performance. So therefore, that's halal, or I would imagine. It's a great replacement for it. So that's something I've been able to take advantage of. But thankfully, my family knows. And then when it comes to the food, guess what? We actually end up, if we do have a meal, they may have some stuff. Actually, they usually end up avoiding pork in general. My mom has actually stopped eating pork. She buys halal for herself now.
MashaAllah.
May Allah help her embrace Islam. She's almost there. So we'll have, something that is permissible to eat when we do that kind of Salatul Rahim, keeping up with the family ties. And then, and I give a gift to my nephews on the basis of the report card as well. So that's kind of how and then they get the gift in advance of Christmas. It's nothing attributing to the idea of Christmas. Thankfully I'm utilizing that particular thing. But when it comes to other holidays that come later, which is maybe another topic, but navigating holidays, we're not into the Halloween, and there's a whole talk. The Halloween talk happens usually around Halloween. Valentine's Day, everybody talks about that. Easter, that's a full-on no. And then, so we've been able to thankfully navigate it, and my family knows what's what. And again, I've been blessed. My family has been chill about it enough, and I think that's just with the way Allah created them and their comportment. So I'm thankful that I have the family that I have, because while we were nominally Christian, we actually grew up very New Age and crystals and weird stuff, which lent itself to being more liberal and more chill. But I found myself in Islam, thankfully. So yeah, that's the thing. It really depends on what's kind of going on in your family. If you've got a hardcore Baptist family, may Allah make it easy for you. If you've got, other things going on, it's tough. And it takes maybe a little bit of bouncing ideas off of people and maybe a call to Iqbal and, send them an email kind of thing to kind of hash out some specifics. But yeah, that's kind of one little thing I wanted to add in there.
Okay, we're going to get into a couple of specific situations that happen around this particular holiday anyway. So a lot of families now, especially with the economy and all that kind of stuff, they're not going out and buying a whole ton of gifts. So instead they're doing gift exchanges where they do like Secret Santa. For Muslims that don't know what that is, it's where everybody puts their name in a hat and you draw a name out of a hat, and as long as you don't get your own, then you buy a gift for that person. So in particularly if it's with family, or this even happens in some small companies or departments of companies where you're asked to participate in a gift exchange, how should we as Muslims go about navigating that, whether our families or coworkers or friends know we're Muslim or not?
Yeah, so again, if they know that you're Muslim and you can take a principled stance, that's always the best to do so, and say that, maybe shower them with love in different ways, just so that they still know you care about them and it's not a matter of you becoming worse because of your religion, and because that's never the intention, and that's why you should show kindness to them, because the hope is that they would embrace Islam as a result of your changed behavior and not be turned off further by it. So that's one point. So it depends on the level of the particular person. When it comes to the technical elements, just from a technical standpoint, it's really easy for a born Muslim like myself to say this, and we understand the challenges of this. But just to get the technicality out of the way, anything which is celebrated with a religious connotation is explicitly haram. So there are certain celebrations which might not be religious as such in nature. Then perhaps there could be some allowance in certain circumstances. They do differ. But things which are explicitly, without any ambiguity, religious in nature, this is sort of, again, as I mentioned, a tacit approval of why you're celebrating in the first place. So that's, again, from the technical perspective. The best thing, again, I could suggest would be shower them with love in other ways. Try to get them to understand. Again, this is easier said than done in certain contexts. And this, also understand that through all of the struggle, whatever hardship you're going through for the sake of Islam, then understand all of this is seen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and rewarded immensely, because this is the type of patience that you have to endure. So sometimes you do have to make these principled stances. So I think that this needs to be said. Again, it could differ. There are situations that even I know of, if people decided to do this, they would be thrown out of their houses, right? Especially in the case of teenagers. So in this context, I don't think it would be wise for them to not partake in at all until they get to a situation in which they can actually do this without this type of backlash.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
With the showering of love, I remember I worked in a particular company and for about 3 years, and when it was holiday time, there was I was able to avoid the Secret Santa, thankfully. You know, I actually, when I got to that place, I actually was able to, I'll be straight up, I was able to exercise some white privilege. And be like, I'm a white guy and I'm a Muslim. And sometimes that works against your fellow cohorts and, you know, that are white. Because they go, huh? And then they actually, you know, their weird attitude, right? Because like, unfortunately, so people have this bent, or maybe unfortunately, they've been trained to discount the experience of people of color, right? But there's also the tradition of doing the sharing of Islam with the people of your culture. So without a doubt, I'm better suited to talk to, you know, Western European people in some degree because I have, you know, I've been there, right? But it's not always the case. Sometimes, like, you know, there's something that's over my pay grade, you know, which is a lot of stuff, right? I know only so much, right? I'm happy to say I don't know. But going back to this, you know, I would bring them, maybe not around holiday time, but I would bring them, I'd make them Moroccan mint tea, atay, as they call it in Morocco. And I'd do the whole thing where they pour it high off the glass and, you know, club chocolate into the pot and everything like that. My wife's Moroccan, so I've learned the skill from her and my father-in-law. So these are the kinds of things that I do and just kind of like, oh, cool, you know. That's kind of how I would show it and be like, hey, this is a part of my mixed Muslim family as well, because I'm in an intercultural family. Ambience. It's okay. But yeah, like that's some of the things that you can do. If you can give, bring them a tray of sweets or cookies or something like that, maybe at another time, and just be like, that's again another way to show the love. But you know, maybe it's not always like, you know, it's not on the holiday time. You know, you have ways to show it. I mean, again, people have, it's the social expectations. Like, you're not doing it at the time it's supposed, like, okay, to be honest though, Islam in and of itself is it's kind of punk rock in a way. You know, you are going against a culture, you know. So, but you're going against a culture, you know, the general Western culture, the general culture of believing and loving things that satisfy your lower self. You're adopting a culture of killing the ego so that you can actually, and by way of that, you're doing things like prayer and fasting and stuff to support a better personality so that you have the best character and that you go forward in life. And then people go like, yeah, like, that person is like actually super awesome and they are one of the best people I know. And then that makes them think about Islam more. So it really, there's a way to do it. It's about time and place. Not everybody is fortunate to do that, but it can come about. And if you can do it in even the most incremental and easy of ways, it still counts. It still counts. Don't think, oh, I can never. No, you can. You can. You just have to be a little creative sometimes.
Yeah, just to add on a little bit to that as well, is Islam, if a person is using their logic purely, they will come to the conclusion that Islam is true. Because Allah says in the Quran that the people that are in hellfire, they will actually say to the people, or the people of Jannah will say to the people of hellfire, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرَ. Like they'll have a conversation. And one of those types of conversations that takes place is that the people will say that are in the hellfire, they will say, قَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. If we listened to the message of Islam, or we used our brains, we would not be in the hellfire. So Islam is a very logical religion in the sense, and throughout the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us, talks about His signs, and says that if you're a person that uses their intellect, you're going to come to the conclusion, Islam is true. And there are many ways that we can understand this. The predictions of the Prophet ﷺ is another one. The miracles within the Quran. There's many angles from which we can understand this. But we also need to think about another perspective, that there were certain Sahaba that the only reason they became Muslim was through the treatment that they got from other Muslimin. One example being Thumama ibn Uthal radiallahu anh, who was one that was initially had a lot of animosity towards Muslims and Islam. And he in fact killed some of the Sahaba. When he was taken as a prisoner of war, the way that he was treated made it such that when he was released, he just went a short distance to a spring. He washed himself and he turned back and he testified that none is worthy of worship but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. And no argument was presented to him. The only thing he got was kind treatment and seeing what Muslims were and how they acted. So the point being here, why am I mentioning this? Is that, as Chris mentioned, sometimes, let's say for example, you're not partaking in the holiday season, then compensate this with better behavior and better morals and the morals of Islam, the best that you can, that supersede who you once were. And when people see that you're a better person, then again, this will soften their hearts towards Islam as well. And that's the hope.
That's what really has graduated. That's motivated my mom closer. It's still been 14 years, but it's what she's now, no liquor, no pork in her household. She's moving closer and closer. So, now it's just do I have time, and I do my best. But again, we must always remind ourselves that, when it comes to our beloved, if they're non-Muslim, only Allah is going to be responsible for them embracing Islam. And that's the other key thing. When it comes to somebody embracing Islam, there's three people involved. Or it's not three people, but three involved. Allah, the person who embraces Islam, and then you. Obviously, Allah is the most important. Then it's the person who embraces Islam. And then you're barely a blip on the radar. You're really barely a blip on the radar. You're just mainly a conduit. You're like a cable carrying electricity, that's it. Yeah.
I'm going to interject as well, something that I've experienced. So when we were talking about, maybe do something after the religious holidays. So when Eid comes around, for the people that know that I'm Muslim, before I started wearing hijab, those that knew I was Muslim, particularly co-workers, I would not participate in their gift exchange, and they would usually do a potluck or something like that on, a few days before the holidays. And so instead I would say, I will make my contribution at New Year's. So, into the first day into the New Year, I would come in with, donuts or samosas or something like that I could share with them. And also during Eid, I would bring stuff into the office and share it with them and explain to them that this was the Eid celebration for Muslims. And, so I would partake in that way, and it not only helped them to understand why I wasn't participating in things like Christmas or Easter or something like that, but it also gave an opportunity for us to talk about Islamic holidays and to share those traditions with them as well. I'm going to get one more question here to both of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So if a Muslim, whether a born Muslim who is reconnecting with their faith or a new Muslim, and their families and co-workers do not know that they are Muslim, and they fear telling them for retribution, maybe at work they feel like it won't be accepted, they might lose their job, or in their families they might be ostracized. So if they do have these gift exchanges going on, whether it be at home or in their co-worker situations, and they decide to participate just to cover up the fact that they don't want to, be seen as not participating and then have questions asked, what do you do if you get something that is haram when you get the gift? Because a lot of places, especially co-workers or families, they'll go to the liquor store and they'll buy a bottle, and that's the gift that they end up giving, or lottery tickets, things like that. And if you get those things, what is allowed for you to do with those? Can you give it to somebody else, trade with somebody else, or is that not recommended or haram, or do you throw it out? What is the Islamic perspective? And Chris, maybe address what the real world expects for converts.
I can mention what I've done. I've been given, in my time as a building manager, I'm a building manager. So in the last 4 years, I've been given bottles of alcohol 3 times. So I've been able to say, oh, that's really lovely, but no, I can't accept this, and you'll have to take it back. I said, but if you want to get me something, you know, find me some coffee. I'm a coffee lover. You know, something cool, something interesting. You know, so I give them an alternative, right? And it actually ends up being much less expensive than a 40-pounder of whatever. So that's how, because I've obviously earned some, you know, appreciation from them, but I have to still be sensitive to the fact that they may have given me a bottle of X, Y, or Z. And I go oh, it's a tall bag. Okay, gee, thanks, but, you know, I appreciate that. However, I'm unable to accept this. So, and I do my best to just be like, nyeh, like, you know, hands off. I don't even try to touch it, where I'm just holding the bag and I'm like, okay, you know what, thanks, here you go, back again. And that's what I've done. So if I've done anything out of the norm, let me know.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, actually, it happened to me once too, believe it or not. So I play hockey, I play ice hockey. So,
Oh, there you go.
So they had a raffle or something like that. Every week, a different person would win something. And a lot of times it's beer. So there have been a time, I think there was one time, I think I came like three weeks in a row. It was like they do the raffle and it's like, oh, I won. Every week it was me. And I'm like, so it's happened to me as well. The best thing, because the point here is that if you can't consume it, then you can't give it to somebody else. If you can't consume it yourself, and it's haram for you to consume, then it's also haram for you to give it to someone else. That's one angle. And the other angle is also that as a Muslim, you don't want to be wasteful, because that's also sinful. So if you're taking this and you're wasting it, then there's a type of sin that could be gained through this as well. So in this situation, the best thing to mitigate all of that would be, yeah, like you said, say that, you know, thanks for this. In my context, I told them that you know, I'm not going to take this, and they offered something else in place of it. So that would be the best situation, so at least you're not being wasteful in this context. Because again, to give it to somebody else, now you're assisting that person in sin, and you never want to do that as a Muslim, and you don't want to be wasteful either. Having said that, let's say it's just forced upon you and you can't get anybody else to take it. What are you going to do with it? In this case, especially if it's alcohol, at least, I honestly, I think it would be better in this case
Or
just
the
to...
Christmas ham.
Yeah, or that. Yeah. In this case, it would be better, I think, to pour it out so nobody's going to drink it.
Yeah.
At least you took this out of the marketplace, right? Like, nobody's going to consume this alcohol. This would be a better solution than giving this over to somebody else that might then consume it.
Would that apply also if you get, as Chris said, you know, if somebody gives you like a Christmas ham or lottery tickets?
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, that's oftentimes what people do. They'll put in scratch tickets, or they'll buy 649, or what's the other one, Super 7.
The 649 one's like, honestly, that's so, like, that's the lamest gift ever.
Yeah, but some
It's
people
like,
just don't know what to
here's
get.
some
so
pieces
that's
of
what they
paper.
do.
Okay.
May as well just
Yeah.
give me some toilet paper, like,
Yeah.
honestly.
And especially if it's a gift exchange where you don't know who the person was that gave it to you, right? So
Yeah.
then what do you do with those types of things? If you try and pass it off to somebody else, or again, rip it up, throw it away.
Okay, good question. So we'll tackle them differently because, believe it or not, they're actually different answers for lottery ticket and ham.
There you go.
So when it comes to the issue of the ham, again, you don't want to be wasteful. If you could give it to an animal, at a certain point when I was studying, I lived on a farm type setting, and we had animals there. So if you could give it to an animal, again, at least you're not being wasteful entirely. And you have a dog, okay, give him. We discussed the issue with dogs, but if you still have a dog, or you know somebody has a dog, okay, at least you're not being entirely wasteful with that. Maybe that's a solution. But again, I think the best thing would be that thanks, but maybe request that you get something else. And if the person, sometimes they actually just want you to enjoy their gift. Even the case of, let's say someone gives your kid a gift, and and on Eid, and somebody else bought him the same thing, then it's like, okay, maybe I'll just give you something else because my intention was to give you something, but now you have it already. And then again, at least to get that satisfaction of being able to give you something. So again, that perhaps could be a solution for the ham issue. When it comes to the lottery issue, we have to look at why are lotteries haram. The reason why they're haram is because the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions in a hadith, نهى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن بيع الغرر. He prohibited a type of transaction which is called gharar. What does gharar mean? It essentially means that when you pay for something and you're not certain of a return. So when you're gambling, for example, and you're paying something, then you're not certain of a return. It's basically, even actually from a technical perspective, warranties and insurance also falls under this. Again, there's a longer fiqhi discussion on both of these issues. So don't say that the Imam said warranties in their entirety or insurance in their entirety and go cancel your car insurance. That's not my intention. There's a longer discussion on these. But they fall into this type of transaction is what I'm trying to say. The point being is that if you receive a lottery ticket, did you pay anything for it? No, you didn't. You didn't pay anything for it. So if you scratch it, is it gambling? No, it's not. So in this case, it's actually halal.
Oh.
So in this case, it's actually halal. You didn't pay anything for it. Somebody just gifted it to you. They gave you this. Here you go. Did you pay anything for it? Nothing. You didn't pay a single cent.
Don't ask people for
Right.
them.
Don't ask. Yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah. But don't say that if you want. Yeah.
Let's put that
yeah.
proviso there.
Yeah. So the point being, again, just from technical perspective, is that Islam wants to safeguard your money, and we all understand how people can get addicted to lotteries and slot machines and the like, and this is going to just destroy you as a person. And Islam came to protect and mitigate all of that and eliminate this type of unnecessary risk. So again, yeah, go ahead.
Jazakallah khair for that answer, because I didn't know that. And, I don't know if anybody's gotten a lottery ticket in a gift exchange and you look at it. I've actually torn them up and thrown them out, and so now I'm like, okay.
You might be regretting at this point now.
Yeah. Maybe that $70 million jackpot that went to nobody a few months ago might have been mine. Okay, so one of the, what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the questions to the audience. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, this is your opportunity to do so, and we will turn it over to you guys now. And if you do have a question, just come up and we'll give you the microphone, or if you have a loud voice, if you have a loud voice, you can just stand and ask the question.
We kind of covered this a little bit, but just the particulars of it. So, work parties, corporate work parties, haram food is being served, alcohol is being served, but you are not going to partake in any of it. It's not compulsory for you to attend. It is part of your overall, it's a soft responsibilities at work, but it's not, they're not going to fire you if you don't attend. What would be the recommendation in that case? Should you still go? Should you not go?
Yeah, so this depends. When it comes to, there's certain categories, and there's kind of a hierarchy in Islam. You have things which they call al-darurat, the necessities of life. Without them, life cannot be managed. Then you also have al-hajiyat, or those things which are needs. And one of those needs is to earn an income. So if this is going to be compromised in a certain sense, if you don't show up at these parties, and it shows a lack of team building or corporate, culture, whatever you want to call it, and it's going to compromise your income, then in this case, with some allowances, with some conditions, again, try your best to navigate this with your employers. I think in these days, things are a lot easier than they once were before, where people, especially with, what do they call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Yeah, so with all of that being more prevalent in Canada than it ever was, at least when I was growing up, I think people are much more accommodating to this in general. So if you can say that, hey, I'll come, but I don't want to drink or want alcohol at the table, people will a lot more be accommodating than they once were. When I was younger, and I think my first job was at Safeway, and I started to grow a beard. It was like a bit of a shadow, and I wanted to show my, it's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. My employer said to shave, and I was essentially forced to, or they said, you're going to be fired. And again, this was back in, at the time it would have been, 2006 or something. Things have changed a lot since then, significantly so. So use this to your advantage is what I would say. And again, if you don't need to go and it's not going to compromise your income, don't go. Because again, the nature of it is it's a Christmas party. Don't go. But if there is going to be some compromise because earning an income is part of the category of needs, which is al-hajiyat, then in this case, there's some allowance, but again, try to mitigate that with at least putting those conditions for yourself and letting the employers know of those conditions as well.
I have two perfect year after year examples. So last year I was transitioned to a new company, but still working in the same location. There was a holiday party, but it was at a catering location, okay? So my wife and I attended, and it was like a new company too. So I did it out of that necessity. You know, hey, make us show up, because literally I just signed the paperwork in November to maintain my position where I was, but with this new company. And so along I went, you know, ate what was, you know, looking vegan, looking vegetarian at that particular event, and stayed, you know, had the cleanest drinks, right? So did that. Now, the announcement for the party showed up this year. Guess where they're having it? At a Resto Pub distillery. So, no, can't. Because from my understanding, what I learned from when Sheikh Yasser Qadi came to Calgary many years ago, you know, there's differences about, you know, what kind of situation is a particular establishment in, what's their primary income, what's their primary, you know, saleable thing. So one of them was, like, if, say, for instance, you talk about a place like Earl's here in town, or Cactus Club, pretty bougie. I don't go to those places anyway, but if you went there during the day, their primary thing is going to be selling food. But then in the evening, it's all, you know, the mixology and all that kind of stuff. So you'd want to stay away from going there in the evening. So likewise, when the announcement of the location was that it was going to be at this particular place, I'm like, I'm going to RSVP and say no thanks, and I'm okay with it. My colleagues know I'm Muslim, but I didn't really like lean on that hard. It just made it seem like I'm busy, you know. For all they know, maybe my wife has one to go to that we're going to. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. So that's the kind of thing, that's the solution building that I've done. Like, I stay away from places that are liquor primary. You know, if they sell alcohol, you know, as their primary thing, you know, I'm not going in there. You know, but if it's a place that sells food, but they have it on the menu and it's there and it's not their primary thing, and I'm there for food, and you know, I'm having the vegan or vegetarian or maybe a fish type option, you know, I'm all for it. So that's kind of some real world reality.
Any questions from anybody else in the audience? Don't be shy.
And it's okay if you want to be shy.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to contact myself or even Brother Chris privately, again, you're more than welcome to do so. We can share our email contact and numbers as well if you feel more comfortable doing so that way.
Yes,
Yep.
brother?
Question like extending these holidays, Christmas gifts at corporate meetings, so that's prohibited, to be very clear.
Yeah, especially if there's no need for that. Like I said, if it's just a fun event, then there's no, especially because it's of a religious nature, it would be haram in this context, yeah.
What if it's being held at the office during work hours? So you're there, you're kind of expected to participate.
Again, do you try to milk the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and try to say that this is...
You don't pay me enough to give you gifts.
So again, try to work around it the best you can.
How about them apples?
In extenuating circumstances where you're not able to do this, then you may have to. But remember something else as well. In certain contexts, you might be sort of forced or compelled to even leave that company. And remember something which is really important principle in Islam, where the Prophet ﷺ tells us, إِنَّكَ لَن تَدَعَ شَيْئًا لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ إِلَّا بَدَّلَكَ اللَّهُ مَا هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنْهُ. That there's no person that leaves something for the sake of Allah, except that Allah will replace it with something that is better. And sometimes you might end up leaving a certain company, and you had all of these connections and years and experience and friends, and because you did so for the sake of Allah, no other reason, that there was too much haram going on, and you couldn't partake in it, at the end of the day, Allah says that He can provide you from sources or avenues you never thought. وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. And avenues that you never thought about, and now you're working at a much better place. And even if this never happens to you, then at the end of the day, the replacement that you're going to get is going to be in Jannah. So even if in this life you don't see that, anytime you give up something for the sake of Allah, you're always going to get something better in exchange for that.
Anybody else? Esther?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Actually, I do lots of volunteer, and I have a Christian friends. And upcoming volunteer event is related to Christmas season. In this volunteer, we make gift and share it for poor children and something like that. But this is related to Christmas. Is that okay to go to do volunteer in that event, or it is not allowed?
I would abstain from this. Anything which has a religious connotation, an explicit religious connotation to it, would be haram. If this is a Christmas event, or this is done exclusively for the purpose of Christmas, then this would be haram in that context, and try your best to stay away from that, especially if there's no need for doing so and there's no repercussions to you as a result of that. Yeah, so it'd be better to stay away and then just do something more generic instead.
Very good question. Anybody else?
Remember a few weeks ago I had talked with you and Brother Chris about birthdays? And
Yeah.
so coming from an Italian background and in a lot of Italian families, it is customary that the younger, though the family might give them gifts, it is customary that we give gifts to our parents on our birthday, grandparents, older family members. I mentioned this in a new Muslim group online a few years ago, and I got ripped apart. I got told it was haram, I was kafir, that, and I said, it saved my relationship with my father. When I became Muslim, my father stopped talking to me for 2 years.
Right.
And in that entire time, I never broke custom. I never broke tradition. I sent the gifts and that were expected at the appropriate time. And all the while, my stepmother was still talking to me, but my father wouldn't have anything to do with me. And then one day he called, and he said, of all my children, he says, you're the only one that kept custom. You're the only one that honored your father. To us, our birthday isn't a celebration of you. It is an honoring of your parents, because they brought you into the world.
Right, I think this is a really good point. There's a technical element of this question as well, and even on a personal level. My in-laws all celebrate birthdays, and even within the Islamic paradigm, there's a spectrum of opinion on birthdays itself. Sometimes people get overzealous, and they take a black and white approach to fiqh, and a lot of times there are nuances to this. You can look up Yasir Qadi's video on the issue of birthdays. Just one thing that we sometimes need to consider as well is sometimes certain things, initially when they began, might have had a pagan association with it. But over time, once this pagan issue is no longer associated with it, that issue now, the ruling can change. I'll give you an example. What is Nike? What is Nike? We all know the swoosh. It's a Greek god. So are you going to say that wearing Nike is haram? Because you're wearing the symbol of a Greek god. The point being is that over time it lost that association. And this is sometimes a nuance in one side of the discussion on birthdays from a technical perspective. And it's actually a nuanced discussion. Among the Muslim Ummah, there are those that celebrate the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. And again, this is a contentious fiqhi issue. There are entire countries that do so. Right? And you also have major scholars that would support this, even in today's time and historically. So it's not a black and white issue, even though some Muslims try to make it as such. And they come across in a very harsh black and white way on these issues. There are some things in Islam which are clear-cut. In al-halal bayin wal-haram bayin. There are issues in Islam, some of them are clear-cut halal, others are clear-cut haram. Others, there are gray areas in which some Muslims might support it, other Muslims might be against it. And sometimes, in a lot of cases, both of them, they have their proofs. They have their proofs for this. So on the issue of birthdays from a technical perspective, we need to understand that even within the Islamic tradition, and again, I would refer you to Dr. Yasir Qadi's video on birthdays if you want the nuanced discussion on that. It's not like I said, Christmas is something which it's an explicitly Christian tradition honoring the birth of Jesus as a God, and again, there's connotations to that, and we can't celebrate that because of this religious nature, nor can we celebrate Diwali or anything else which is of a religious nature in and of itself. But over time, once this association becomes sort of broken off, then these nuances do come about. And again, some people, they take a really literal approach to this, and the fiqhi discussion was never like this to begin with. So that's from a technical element. Those people that are saying this to you and ripping you apart in this way, they're not wise, number one, and from a technical angle, they could also be challenged in this way. And like I said, my in-laws celebrate birthdays. If I don't send happy birthday to one of my in-laws, and they're all Muslim, and memorize the Quran, and all of these things as well, but if I don't tell them happy birthdays, in certain societies in the world, where I studied in South Africa, in fact, I was at a masjid there, and it was customary of that masjid, in that small community, that at the Jumu'ah, if there were people in the community that it was their birthday, they would say on the minbar, so-and-so's birthday is today, just as a means of community building. So I've seen this again from the Islamic perspective. And again, you can take a safer approach if you want for yourself and say, you know what, I feel more inclined to the position of birthdays being haram, and from a perspective of wanting to safeguard your religion and your honor, because the hadith mentions halal is clear, haram is clear. Between that are doubtful matters. If a person wants to safeguard their religion, they'll stay away from those doubtful matters as well, and this can be a reward for you. But again, understand the technical aspect of this before we get into it.
Yeah, but to come from a culture where it's a
Yeah.
case of honoring one's parents.
Okay, so now comes the other part of it as well. For myself, the reason why I do it is the exact same reason. Is for, I know that if I don't do this, and don't do this type of honoring, then it's going to break something which is more important, which is silatul rahim. And here we need to understand that Islam is a logical religion, that there are things which sometimes are more important than others, right? As an example, in the month of Ramadan, you have to fast. It's an obligation upon every Muslim. But there is something else, which is the wellness of your body, which you call hifdhun nafs. You need to protect the wellness of your being. And because of this, if you're sick, you don't fast. Another example could be a situation in which the famous story of a companion, that he had an injury on his head. And what happened is that he went to sleep, and then he had to take a fard ghusl, the obligatory bath in the morning. And you can't pray without this. And he had an injury on his head. So he washed his head, and then because of the fact that he washed this injury, he died. And the Prophet ﷺ became upset by this. And he said that you killed him. He actually mentions these words. You should have asked me. It would have been sufficient for him simply to wipe. Why am I saying this point? Because the issue of the preservation of life takes precedence over ibadah, over worship. Another example, if you have a kid that's about to fall into a well or like get hurt, and you're praying, a fard prayer, an obligatory prayer, you're required to break your prayer and save the kid, because his life takes precedence over your worship. So now in this case as well, I would say the same thing. The issue of birthdays, why we would not want to celebrate it is because of the fact that the Prophet ﷺ tells in hadith that مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. For example, one argument that they would use, whoever imitates a people is from among them, and perhaps there's a pagan association to it as we go further back, but again we discussed this issue. Now we need to classify, does this take precedence over the issue of silatul rahim? And in my understanding, or my opinion on this issue, is that it doesn't. And the reason for this is that there are 5 things Islam came to protect and preserve. There are 5 fundamentals that Islam, you could add on one other one, you could say 6 things which they call al-darurat, or things Islam came to protect and preserve. One of them is the religion of Islam. Another one of them is your life. And the religion of Islam is more important than your life, and that's why you can give your life for the sake of Islam. It's a hierarchy of this. Another one of them is the family structure. Another one of them is the family structure, and this is the key point. Another one of them is your intellect. That's why you can't drink. However, in the case where you need to take some intoxicants to save your life, can you? Yes, you can. Another one of them is to safeguard your honor. And am I missing one, Umar? I think there's one. Hifd al-mal, to safeguard your money. That's the 6th one, right? So these things are important, and they take precedence sometimes over other secondary issues. If you're on an island and the only thing you have to eat is pig, eat the pig. It's mentioned in the Quran. Right? If you eat this out of compulsion, then there's no sin upon you to do so. So again, and from my understanding, the fact that you saved your relationship with your father, this is more important than abstaining from birthdays, especially in the way that you explained it, that it's actually honoring them and not them honoring you. I think this is more important. And again, from a technical perspective, there's a discussion there to be held as well.
Sister Wendy, I think you had a question?
Patricia?
Trisha, sir, Trish.
I was just going to ask, okay, I volunteer for the city of Calgary, and my building is owned by the city of Calgary, where I live. So they asked me to participate in Christmas party this year, and I said, sorry, you guys can do it, I'm doing an Eid party in April or whatever, in May. And they said, how about if it's a holiday party? We're celebrating all of the holidays. But then I said I could. Is that?
Yeah, so the more generic you make it, I mean, the kind of undertone is, we all know what it's actually for. That's what I'm kind of trying to
That's
say.
getting into that perennialism thing.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all different paths lead to God, kind of, that kind of.
There's religious,
Yeah.
honestly, so I don't think that Christmas even anymore. Sometimes it is though.
Yeah, like it could be an end of year party or something to that effect.
Yeah, like it's lost its religious effect as far as.
Yeah, so the more generic it becomes, the more acceptable it happens. But again, there's sort of an undertone to all of these parties, and it's kind of known why they're happening, right? I mean, there's a Christmas tree there. And, so
Speaking of which, Trim, I've always kind of known, I haven't done it, but like, let's say for instance, my mom, she's older, she wants to have a tree, and I'm like the only one capable.
Right.
To help her with this. It's like, you know, out of Salatul Rahim, helping her with this, you know, yay, nay,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, avoid it as best you can, but,
Yeah.
but you know, you don't want her falling off of a ladder,
Yeah.
trying to put the star on top or something like that.
Right. So in this one, like Allah says in the Quran, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. That work together on issues of righteousness and piety, and don't work together on issues of sin and transgression. So for example, if there was a non-Muslim that was working towards a cause that we believe in, let's say the issue of Palestine or something like that, or something to that effect, can we work with them? Yes, we can. Or any other issue, the issue of gender ideology, and the issue that parents should have the right to the education of their children, something like that. Even if it's a non-Muslim, we can work with them on these particular issues, because it's working together on issues of piety and righteousness. However, when it comes to working together on issues of transgression and sin, then that's where the restriction does come into play. And I would not recommend, because again, they're putting up this Christmas tree, and maybe they're singing "Oh Christmas Tree," and now it's you facilitating shirk, right? So, so you wouldn't want to do that.
Okay, no, it's good.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it hasn't come up, but you know, it's just best to see where the you know, which side of the road that lies upon.
Right.
I think.
Any other questions?
I just want to add one more
Yeah,
thing.
right.
So for the folks here that are, maybe you would consider yourself active du'at, people who actively share about the religion, I'm happy you're here, because again, even though this topic is here for, you know, the reverts, converts, new Muslims, what have you, And we want them and their families to hear this stuff because there's nuances to be known. It's good that the active duat know how to navigate that too, because sometimes when somebody's really gung-ho and they want to share and they just are like, and they don't have that nuanced knowledge, they get what happens to Sister Fatima, they do that all or nothing, haram, and then at what point then are you now possibly participating in the destruction of that person's faith? So it's really important that if you are on a path of sharing the deen, that you keep following, the path of knowledge, building upon that knowledge, and getting to know if you need, because there's one thing about knowing for yourself. Because if you've come from a born Muslim family, there's lots to know and there's lots to go through and navigate. But then if all of a sudden you feel like you want to be sharing in the revert community and helping out with getting shahadas, please, get deep in this knowledge, because knowing those nuances pays dividends. Because often a lot of people, I'll point out a statistic. It's probably 10 years old now. In America, about 20,000 people embrace Islam every year. But guess what? 70% of them end up leaving it off within that same year. So, what are the sources of that? That could be debated. But we know we can anecdotally say one of the sources can be just being a little too extra with people when you maybe need to actually show some grace and some nuance in your answers. And so, Jazakallah khair for being here and developing your knowledge, because that's what we need in the community, so that you can actually be another person for others to lean on, because there's no team of Avengers imams or X-Men imams that are going to swoop in, right? As another organization has said, Tajdīd Collective, so it's important for all of us to really broaden our knowledge and really build community in this way.
Anybody else? Okay, so I have one question that kind of occurred to me. And this is for both new Muslims or even, converts who have converted a long time ago, or born Muslims who are reconnecting with their faith, or even Muslims who have always been practicing. We live in a Western society that practices, that celebrates these holidays like Christmas, Halloween. What do you say to your young children who see all of their friends getting Christmas gifts, going out and having fun with their family, celebrating the holidays, or at Halloween, dressing up and going door to door, getting candy, that kind of thing? How do we address that with young children that don't understand why they cannot participate in those types of things?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And like you said, Muslims deal with this as well as new Muslims, and perhaps even on an equal basis, especially in the context that we're living in. The first thing is to make Muslim celebrations exciting. Because as human beings, we want to celebrate. That's within us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us 2 days, the 2 Eids. And unfortunately, we find, especially in Calgary, a lot of families, even family of my own cousins, that don't take the day of Eid as a day of celebration. They'll have an exam and they'll just go for the exam, and they have school, and they'll come in the morning to the masjid and they'll go for school. Or some people, they just go to work like normal, and they didn't even take the day off because they think that, what's the point? And they don't make it a big day of celebration for their kids as well, so they don't really grow up with that. So the first point is to really bring alive the Muslim celebrations, Ramadan, Eid, and make those alive within them, so they start to love that, because that's what Allah gave us as Muslims, those particular days. So that would be the first answer to that. Another point would be to ensure or try your best to really pay attention to the environment that your children are within and growing up in. Because you're shaped by your environment. Even your accent is shaped by your environment. You're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And especially from a young age when they're really impressionable like that, then really you have to start from a young age. And sometimes it becomes too late. Sometimes it really does become too late for a lot of kids that all of their friends celebrated, and then they decide at a later age in life that they want to do the same thing. And they put up an Eid tree or something, or they put up the tree and they say they were celebrating Jesus. This happens in Calgary more than you think. Jesus is the Prophet of Islam, so therefore we're celebrating Isa alayhi salam, and they'll put up a tree. And this comes about because, as I mentioned, Muslims or human beings want to celebrate. And when you start from a young age, you bring them to the masajid, you put them in an Islamic school, you have Muslims around them that are friends. My son and his friends, every time they see a Christmas light, they're like, that's haram. Like they're like 4 and like he turned 5 today actually, and his friend is 6, and they'll point this out from like a really young age, and sometimes they're even in a store and they'll say this loud, and say things like this, and you kind of have to tell them to tone it down a little bit. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing. So
my daughter, she at a younger age, she was doing that.
Yeah. So. And my son, for example, he would even tell people like, they don't know Allah, they know Allah, like, sometimes it's like take it easy. So you can instill this within them from a young age, make them love the stories of the prophets, make them love Islam, and when you do this, you're not going to face these sorts of issues.
I'm going to jump in and say, we tried to do this just this past year. It worked out to some degree. Moroccans, they love their sacrifices, okay? Especially for Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Kabir, as they also know it, right? If you don't get a sheep, you're just like, and there's rulings around, the necessity of getting a sacrifice and stuff. But anyway, this year, Tajdīd-ul-Iman, before we changed names, we actually offered the opportunity to come. There's a brother near Stratton. He has a farm, and you can buy a sheep, you can buy a goat, you can in fact buy shares in a cow and get that done. So we actually said to a bunch of people, hey, if you have not experienced it and and you want to go to a farm and you want to see what it's like, there are people who go there, they do their sacrifice. Now you don't have to go and watch the sacrifice. If you're squeamish, you don't need to be there for that. But there's all in this farmland, there's people also picnicking on the day of Eid. They've gone and done their Eid prayer, and then they've got their kids running around the farm in the safe places. I'm kind of worried sometimes, like, watch out, that's a rusty nail. But we've made it so that, hey, this is the fun time. We're going to go and we're going to do our sacrifice, do our hawli, and then we have a little picnic, and that's how we've started to create the love of Eid al-Adha. And then, same thing, like when it comes to Eid al-Fitr, right after Ramadan, we try to get together with people we've had, converts, new Muslims in our home and stuff like that. Or we try to do something just kind of shortly thereafter. So these are the kinds of things that we do as Tajdīd-ul-Iman, and we did prior to. Another thing we do in Ramadan is we have the Ramadan Connection program. So if you are new to Islam, or you're say for instance a born Muslim who's lapsed and now they're coming back, we actually find families that we have vetted, because you can't send people to just any family. You have to send people to families who have also a sense of sensitivity and hikmah at their dinner table, because sometimes they play 20 questions with the revert, and that can be awkward. Are you going to get married? Or something like that. Like, it's just like, okay, cool, pump those brakes, And the marriage stuff, that's actually a topic we should have. Converts and marriage and stuff. I have my opinions on that.
So do I.
Yeah. So, and we do that. So we put people in households. Shahab has hosted, I've hosted, and it's been great, And we have people over. They break their fast. Sometimes people stay a little longer, and Other families, they identify that they're going to come to the masjid or the masalla for Taraweeh. And then, then it's an opportunity to invite that person for Taraweeh as well. So we do those kinds of things to create a love for our holidays, for our acts of worship. So that's what we kind of do, because there is, without a doubt, out in this community, you can find everything you need in terms of fulfilling your daily do, what you have to do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's the lived reality, it's the social reality. So that's what we also are here for. But social reality in the sense of like creating a love for existing as a revert Muslim, I don't consider myself a revert anymore, by the way. Like, I've been Muslim for 14 years, and may Allah continue to make my heart grow and be big, and everybody. Because the thing is, it's like that label sheds off. It should shed off. You shouldn't think of yourself as just like, I'm junior. No, grow. We're not static people. We have the right to grow. So that's what we're here for. We're here for you, to support you in that. And another thing that we're going to, I guess is plugging some things that we're going to end up doing. We've been talking to Imam Iqbal. It may not happen this month, but one thing we want to do is a prayer clinic. And the idea of a clinic being come and learn the basics of the prayer, okay? And whether you're a new Muslim, you're curious about Islam, or you've been a Muslim and in the true sense, a clinic, maybe your recitation is not that great. And one of the metrics I would love everybody to leave by, especially for people who have English as their mother tongue, is to be able to know what they're saying in English. Because when you are saying the prayer in Arabic, you want to be, it takes some work, but you got to be able to say that Arabic and hopefully think in tandem the English so that you're getting that connection in your heart, right? Because you're just muttering words if you don't know it. And that does not belittle the fact that we must recite our prayers in Arabic and what have you. But the thing is, for that extra step, I want to make sure people are getting that, inshallah. So maybe that could be like, we're looking to see what we can do in the new year for that, most likely, inshallah. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up and conclude. Omar, I'd love for you to recite for us again. It's wonderful. So, Asa, can you do that one for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
So before we do that, I would just like to thank everybody for coming out and sharing this event with us and contributing. I would say for people in the audience who have families, whether you're born Muslim, convert who is married and has families, if you know somebody out there, whether they're a convert or whether they're a born Muslim who is on their own, living by themselves or don't have family in town, try and encourage them to come and join you for the holidays. It helps to, especially for converts who may not have family that celebrate their Islamic holidays, it helps to bring that closer to their hearts, And so I would encourage everybody to do that if you know somebody. And also if you know people that are new Muslims or close to coming into Islam, you can guide them to our group, Tajdīd-ul-Iman and Becoming Muslim Calgary. I think we're still under the New Muslim Circle website.
We know we have tajdīdcalgary.ca.
Okay, so
Yeah.
tajdīdcalgary.ca. So we would encourage you to have them connect with us so that we can, help them with whatever they need. And I also want to thank Imam Iqbal for his expertise and guidance today, and Brother Chris for his expertise and guidance and input as well.
Inshallah, we'll do more of this too.
Inshallah.
It's
Inshallah.
really been wonderful.
Inshallah. So with that, also if you have questions that you didn't want to ask, please feel free to either come and talk to either Brother Chris or Imam Iqbal after the event, or maybe get their contact information that you could maybe talk to them privately if it's a question that you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the group. And with that, I will turn it over for the closing recitation and dua.
Dua, Sheikh, about is more
No,
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 go
but
ahead, go ahead.
yours is, I mean, we start with you, we end with you. Okay.
Go ahead, go ahead. Sit down.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Can I have a final closing dot?
Absolutely.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيتك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا اللهم بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Thank you again, everybody, for coming. There's some refreshments at the back. Please feel free to help yourself. And hopefully we'll see you at our next event. Thank you so much.